today here on Point of View. We have a lot to cover over the next couple of hours. Let me just mention that a couple of the articles that we've posted, want to spend some time looking at those briefly. Then this hour we'll have Jonathan Saenz with us once again. He is the president of Texas Values, and I might just mention, and I'm sure he will mention it more than a few times, there's an opportunity for you to join him this week in Austin. And if you've always said, I'd kind of like to know how this Texas government thing works, that will be a great opportunity for you. Then the next hour, we'll get into some of the other issues in the news. Adam Keener will be with us, who's with Wycliffe. And then in the third hour, even though you won't necessarily hear it on these radio stations, you can certainly still hear it because we broadcast to the national audience on the subject of evangelism. One of the concerns that Larry Moyer of EvanTell has brought up is the fact that more and more of these seminaries aren't even teaching a course on evangelism. The other day, I had Paul Baraka in studio. I'm going to read a little bit from his material as well, in which he also expressed his concern that evangelism is sort of becoming de-emphasized even by missions groups. So we're going to get into that issue, explain maybe why, talk about what we need to do as individual Christians, what you need to do in your church. And so those will all be important topics over the next couple of hours. Let me just mention that the first article I've posted here is by Kevin Williamson, and it's entitled The High Price of No Prices. And the reason he posted this is because the Trump administration is considering a rule that would require doctors and hospitals to disclose the rates they negotiate with insurance companies. This would be a step, let's be honest, a small step towards transparency. And the example he used is from Milton Friedman, who's the economist who said there are really four ways you can spend money. Number one, you can spend your own money on yourself. Number two, you can spend someone else's money on yourself. Number three, you can spend your own money on someone else. And number four, you can spend someone else's money on someone else. And, of course, those are the options. Number one is, of course, the most efficient model. That's how you spend money on yourself. But the reality is the way we do healthcare, we use one of the other options. Option number two is we spend someone else's money on ourselves. How many times when you go to a doctor or a hospital, that's kind of like, well, I don't really care what the cost because my insurance company is paying for it. Of course, indirectly, you are paying for it, but we'll get into that in just a minute. And so that's the first issue. Politicians love spending other people's money on other people. That's option number four. And even when the costs are high, we don't like paying taxes. That's number three, because we sometimes underfund programs for the vulnerable and the needy. So he goes through the whole options there. But I thought to bring it back home, I'll just use kind of my own experience from last week. Because last week I went to the doctor for a checkup and also took my family out to dinner. And my experience as a consumer was vastly different. In the restaurant, you have total transparency. The menu not only had the prices of the items, but also pictures of most of them. So first of all, we knew what it was going to look like when they delivered the food to us. Number two, we knew what it was going to cost. And frankly, even in my head, I'd already started calculating the tip before I received the bill because I knew approximately what it was going to cost me. Now, let's go to the doctor's office. I had no idea what my procedures would cost. Even as the doctor kind of was going through the tests that they would run on my blood work, there was no mention of cost. You know, and, okay, we're going to run this test, and we're going to run this test. We've got this blood, and we're running this test. And so really, I had no idea what I was going to pay until I got to the receptionist desk and received the verdict. Now, because I've been to the doctor before, there wasn't any sticker shock, but you know where there sometimes is. And the reason the Trump administration, of course, wants to change this is because they believe that this would be a step in the direction of what we call healthcare transparency. And so that's the first issue. We don't know what it would cost. The second, of course, back to the issue that Kevin Williamson points out, is the fact that someone else is paying for those in many cases. If you go back to my family dinner, imagine somebody just handed us a credit card and said, go out and have a nice dinner, and we'll pay for it. And it really doesn't matter what you charge. Well, we're going to pay a lot more attention to the left side of the menu, what the items are, than we are the right side of the menu, which is the cost. And that's kind of what we have. But the reality is that there needs to be, at least on the part of the consumer, some attention to cost. 2 years ago, I wrote a commentary because they had done this extensive survey in the county in which I live. I live in Collin County. and they found a major difference in the cost for a heart bypass. The average cost for all the hospitals that do heart bypass in Collin County was about $164,000. But one medical center there charged more than $80,000 more than that, and you can do the numbers. It's in close to kind of almost $250,000. So there does, I think, illustrate the point. It illustrates it perhaps so profoundly that, price sensitivity and maybe consumer evaluation. Now, I recognize if you're in an emergency room and it's an emergency, you don't have that kind of choice. But most people actually are going to get a heart bypass and could ask that question. But again, if somebody else paying for it, you don't really ask that question. The reason why this issue of healthcare transparency is even more important is in the old days, the argument used to be, well, someone else is going to pay for it. But almost all of us now live in the world with very high deductibles, which means we pay for it. And so the argument that used to kind of work, somebody else is paying for it, that's option number 2, really gets back to option number 1, spending money on yourself, because lots of times that's the case. And so we would never think, I would think, of going into a restaurant that didn't have the prices posted. Although I do know of restaurants where they don't post the prices. I guess the argument is, if you have to ask, you probably shouldn't be there. But most of us expect that when we get car repair, when we buy groceries, when we go to a restaurant, that we would have some level of transparency. But we've almost come to expect that when we go to a doctor's office or a hospital, we don't have that level of transparency. So I may come back to this a little bit later, but this piece by Kevin Williamson really kind of makes the case for transparency and really begins to take in a whole lot of other issues we haven't talked about. But I just thought this is one of those issues that the Trump administration is considering. I think it makes a great deal of sense. We expect transparency almost in every other area, but somehow we just don't seem to have it very well in the area of healthcare, and maybe the times are changing. When we come back, I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about some of the things said by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez at South by Southwest. That's a festival in Austin. And as you might imagine, she said some pretty outrageous things. And I don't really want to pick on her other than to use her as an example of what many people in her generation believe. And because they believe it, I think it's important to criticize it because in many cases it's very significantly wrong and does not take into account some of the facts that we talk about every day here on Point of View. So not necessarily picking on her. I think we'd be smart if we just ignore her most of the time. But when she says things on a national forum that are just simply needing some correction, we'll provide that next. And then Jonathan Saenz will be with us at the bottom of the hour. A lot to talk about. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Venezuela is in a total economic and humanitarian disaster. Inflation is rampant. The inflation rate has already exceeded 2 million%. All supplies, including toilet paper, are in short supply. Medicine is unavailable in most of the country, and food shortages, along with a crumbling economy, have forced people to change their eating habits. All are losing weight and battling malnutrition in what has come to be known as the Maduro diet. President Nicolas Maduro is one of the reasons for the economic devastation, along with the previous policies of Hugo Chavez. If you needed an object lesson on why socialism is bad for a country and its people, you need look no further than Venezuela. The economic resources are there. The husband of one of my colleagues used to travel to Venezuela with the major oil companies, which brought prosperity to many in the country. But the Chavez government started taking majority stake in various oil projects, and oil companies from the U.S. and Europe left the country. Oil prices dropped, and today we have a crisis so bad that people are eating out of garbage cans and catching and eating zoo animals, dogs, cats, and birds. Trying to get humanitarian aid to the people is difficult. Maduro has blocked aid from crossing the border, arguing that it could be a potential Trojan horse that would lead to military intervention. Earlier this year, the leader of the legislature, Juan Guaido, declared himself to be the acting president and has been backed by the Trump administration. Vice President Mike Pence declared to the people of Venezuela, "We are with you, we stand with you, and will stay with you until democracy is restored." He's also called for leaders in other countries to join the U.S. He said there can be no bystanders in Venezuela's struggle for freedom. We need to pray for our leaders and pray for the people in Venezuela who are suffering through this crisis. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Thinking Man Films, Patterns of Evidence, The Moses Controversy. Did Moses write the first books of the Bible? Patterns of Evidence in theaters March 14th, 16th, and 19th only.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me just mention one of the other articles I've posted here is about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or AOC as more and more people are calling her. And again, she was speaking at the annual South by Southwest Festival in Austin and giving us a heavy dose of socialist rhetoric. And again, she is free to express her opinion, and we're also free to maybe clarify some of the things that she has to say and critique some of those. And again, it is not meant to be critical of her. As a matter of fact, I do warn and have tried in many cases to warn commentators, don't go after her. She is a freshman member of Congress. She, in most cases, would be a backbencher, but because the media decided to give her prominence and because she has more Twitter followers than almost anybody except Donald Trump in the political realm, she has a very large megaphone. So, in that respect, when she says some things that are incorrect, worth correcting, but again, let's not go after her. She's perhaps, if nothing else, a representative of many people in her generation. And frankly, I'm glad that we have that, because otherwise I'd be having to say, well, now the Rasmussen poll tells us that more millennials believe socialism is better than capitalism. That doesn't quite fit as easily in a radio program as to say, this is what one of the, if you will, spokespeople for the millennial generation says about this. And she starts off, of course, being very critical of Ronald Reagan, which I thought was kind of interesting, because even the liberals say, you know, Reagan's sort of the patron saint for a lot of conservatives. That's probably not somebody you want to take on, but she's quite willing to do so. And she says, you know, I think a perfect example how special interests and powerful have pitted white working class Americans against brown and black working class, and how they blank over the working class is what Ronald Reagan started talking about, welfare queens. And he says, you think about the image there, and they're really trying to talk about what was the whole issue. Now, of course, she goes into and uses words I can't use on a radio program, but the point she's making is that she really says that this whole division between the white and black, or the white and people of color, started with Ronald Reagan. I frankly have to say that a lot of that happened long before Ronald Reagan was there, and a lot of it was on the Democratic side. But back to the point, she was simply saying that this is a caricature, but what Ronald Reagan was trying to do is talk about the fact that there were more and more people sliding into what's called dependency. And you don't have to go to a Republican to hear that comment. You had a man by the name of Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who served as the senior senator from New York until he was replaced by Hillary Clinton. But even when he had been involved with some of the things the Johnson administration was doing, he warned that what we could end up with a welfare system that's very generous, and a welfare system that only paid single mothers is forcing the men out of the home and creating a level of dependency. And so, if nothing else, the argument that Ronald Reagan was trying to make, and the argument many have since then tried to make, and the argument even made back in the late 1960s and early 1970s by people like Daniel Patrick Moynihan, Senator Moynihan, was this issue of dependency. But she, of course, sees everything in sort of a black-white idea and fails to understand that. Interestingly enough, one of the quotes in this piece here is from Jeff Charles, who said, "The white progressive savior continues to pose as a friend of minorities, but in reality, they're using them as a useful political tool. That is why Joe Biden told a crowd of black Americans that Republicans want to put you all back in chains." And of course, we have heard this in previous campaigns. You're going to hear it a lot in this campaign. And as I've said before, even for some of you that are saying, why are you even talking about the 2020 elections? Well, that's because by this time next year, they will be over. They have front-loaded more and more of the primaries, not just the state of Texas, which will have a vote for the primary in March, but California and others. And so in some respects, this is why almost every week you are seeing those individuals who are running on the Democratic side for the presidency making more and more of these sort of outrageous statements. Of course, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is not running, but in some respects, because she's not, she's free to say just about anything she wants. But that's kind of the idea being presented, that we have to get some attention. So we get attention by making some remarkably outrageous statements. But let's come back to, again, what AOC said about this idea of capitalism. And that one, I thought, was perhaps the most striking and illustrative, again, of why we have produced a booklet on capitalism and socialism, why we've done Outlook articles on it and all the rest. But again, quoting from Representative Ocasio-Cortez, she said, "We seek and prioritize profit and the accumulation of money above all else, and we seek it at any human and environmental cost. We have created artificial scarcity, and that's why we've been driven to work 80 hours a week when we are at our most productive at any point in American history. And so, we've been working the least amount we've ever worked. But if we were actually paid based upon how much wealth we're producing, but we're not, we're paid on how much we're desperate enough to accept, and then the rest is skimmed off and given to a billionaire." Okay, it's kind of hard to even sort all of this out. But first of all, who works 80 hours a week? I do know a few people, but that's people that have two jobs and all the rest. You might remember that her argument before is the reason we have wealth going up in America is because people are working 2 and 3 jobs. Now, I work 2 jobs, but most people don't do that. But, the bottom line is, you go back and look at the numbers, those are very, very rare individuals indeed. The wealth is going up. The median family income is going up dramatically, and that has to do, I think, with the reduction of regulations, the increase of some of the economic stimulus, as well as lowering taxes have actually increased tax revenues. But nevertheless, that was one of the other arguments that she was making, that indeed we, if nothing else, are being sucked dry by the capitalist system. And of course, the argument that we would make is just the opposite. As a matter of fact, my commentary today is on Venezuela. And one of the things I say in terms of this incredible tragedy in Venezuela right now is, if you wanted an object lesson on what socialism does to individuals, what socialism does to various countries, just recognize that there was a decision made by Hugo Chavez about a decade plus ago in which he decided to take majority ownership of all of the oil companies. Many of the oil companies, especially the American and British ones, just left. And then when the price of oil dropped, you have the crisis that we have right now. And that in large part shows how socialism really stifles innovation, motivation, inspiration, entrepreneurship, and how capitalism certainly provides a reward for hard work, investment, and thrift. Yes, are there greedy people in the capitalist system? Sure. Are there also greedy people in a socialist system? Sure. The problem is not the economic base. which is the argument of Karl Marx and really the argument of AOC and Bernie Sanders. The problem is in the human heart. Individuals can be very selfish. They can be very greedy. But you have to ask yourself that given that reality, what is a system that protects us most from those individuals? And capitalism is a system, as I've said before, in which evil people and greedy people and ambitious people can do least harm, and at the same time, a system which provides the greatest freedom for good people to do good works. And given the fact that we're created in God's image and we have value and dignity and people can be altruistic and have integrity and character and compassion, it's a system that allows them the greatest freedom, but it's also a system that protects us, perhaps more than many others, from greedy, ambitious people. So it's a system in which evil people can do least harm and good people have the freedom to do good works. Well, again, those are arguments that we make in our booklet. And if you don't have a copy of the booklet on capitalism and socialism, let me encourage you to get a copy. Of course, we've also posted many articles about that and certainly have I've done a number of interviews over the years that talk about the benefits of a free market system and some of the drawbacks of socialism. But perhaps the best example is my commentary today on Venezuela. And if you go to the website, you'll see that we have that posted today. If you would like to receive that, you can just click on it and print it out. If you'd like to receive my Viewpoints commentary, click on that button that says Sign Up. And that's a way in which you will have my commentaries actually land in your inbox all through the week. Monday through Friday, Penna Dexter's commentary will land in your inbox on Saturday. And I might mention that on March 13th, I have a commentary called Sweet Potatoes. It all relates to something that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was saying on a YouTube video when she was cutting up sweet potatoes, and it's just another kind of response to some of the things that she and other millennials have been saying. So again, you'll find some great material at our website. When we come back, Jonathan Saenz will be with us. We have a lot to talk about what's going on at the state capitol right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
And now we bring to the microphone Jonathan Saenz. Again, is the head of Texas Values. If you haven't already marked your calendar, this Wednesday is the Texas Faith and Family Day, so we certainly want you to actually attend that. We'll get an update on the hashtag Ban the Bible Bills. And Jonathan, it's just always great to have you on the program with us.
Well, it's great to be with you, Kerby. I had back-to-back interviews for today with the radio, so I apologize on my timing.
Well, you did just fine, and we caught you in time. Just a few minutes ago, we were talking about South by Southwest Festival there in Austin. I think it just, if nothing else, illustrates that you're in the middle of all of this, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had a lot of critical things to say about everything from Ronald Reagan to capitalism. So we did talk about that, and I guess the whole Austin scene is something that you have had to deal with over the years, being down there at the state capitol.
Well, that's right. You know, our office is right on Congress at 900 Congress. We're 2 blocks south of the Capitol. So we do get to witness, if you will, a whole lot of interesting activity, particularly this time of year and other times of year. But, you know, look, what's important is what's happening at the Capitol for the work that we do. You know, people can say a lot. They can try to come in from other states. But that doesn't take away the opportunity for constituents and people that are Texans that vote here and that are represented by people at the Capitol to go to the Capitol and make a difference. You know, just a couple of people going into an office is actually quite rare. People think that there's like all this traffic all the time at the Capitol. There are a lot of people that come to the Capitol that tour the Capitol. There's no question about that. But as far as people actually going into an elected official's office and talking to them about the issues, that's not as common as people think, particularly constituents. There are a lot of lobbyists going in and out those doors, but people that are actually constituents for individual districts, that hasn't happened as often, and that's why people have a great opportunity to do that at our Faith and Family Day coming up this Wednesday.
Well, again, we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute, but let's talk about some of the pro-family priorities on your website, which people can find at txvaluesaction.org, and of course we have all the other links there as well. But you talk about religious freedom as well as privacy in life. Let's get back to this issue of religious freedom, because some people might say, well, you know, we just heard that Jack Phillips' case was set aside, so he seems to be doing pretty well. But take us to the state of Texas, because you have a woman that was a cake baker in Longview, Texas, who also declined to design a cake for a same-sex wedding. So I think it illustrates why you are so concerned about what you call these ban the Bible bills. Explain, if you might.
Well, that's right. And there's a wedding venue in North Texas and Salina that come under some heat because they want to follow their biblical beliefs when it comes to how they run their business, and when they're being requested or people want to force them to be involved in wedding ceremonies that go against their private property rights and their religious liberty rights. And, you know, what we see is these bills that put sexual orientation and gender identity, or attempt to, in the state law. They've tried to do it at the local level. City of Carrollton recently did it, City of Dallas. But typically these bills and these proposed legislation, these laws with sexual orientation and gender identity are used as weapons against people of faith, because they typically revolve around people's viewpoints and beliefs regarding sexuality, regarding marriage between a man and a woman. And people have conscience rights when it comes to these issues. They have religious-based beliefs, and they believe what the Bible says about these issues. And so, but the folks that are pushing sexual orientation and gender identity legislation, which typically is your progressive, liberal LGBT advocates, they want the government to pick winners and losers on this. They want the government to punish people because of their biblical-based beliefs. And so that's why we're calling these ban the Bible bills, because if the government punishes you because of your biblical beliefs on marriage and sexuality, they've effectively banned you from being able to live out your life based on what the Bible says. And there are a number of these bills that were filed last week, more of them, excuse me. I think there were close to a dozen before last week. Last week was the deadline for bills to be filed. More and more of them have been filed. And, you know, look, they're going to face a lot of opposition at the Capitol. There's no question. But this is more of these bills than we've ever seen. You've now got an LGBT caucus. There's a lot more organization around these things. And I think some of them think because of some of the election results that they've got some momentum on their side. And so people need to stand up and be accounted for and say, we don't support this. Now, we've had people go through our system. Over 40,000 emails and messages and phone calls have been sent to elected officials opposing this type of sexual orientation, gender identity legislation that we're calling our Ban the Bible bills. So there's been a lot of opposition. There's no question, but the fight is not over. We're only about halfway through the legislative session. But as a result of that, you've seen now a bill that's been filed, House Bill 1035. It's called the Free to Believe Act.
Yes.
And this is an effort to make it clear that religious liberty, that the First Amendment, it does apply in situations with private business owners, Christian counselors. And these are the type of people that have been targeted by these sexual orientation and gender identity bills. And so we directed people to support House Bill 1035 through our email and our social media channels last week, and we're seeing a tremendous response so far.
Again, House Bill 1035, so we'll get into that in just a minute. Let's talk about that, because you have been talking about, of course, individuals, but given your Catholic background for just a minute, you know, Catholic hospitals have been sued simply because they won't perform certain surgeries, and we can get into the details of that, but I think the whole issue, I think people can figure that out, which would actually violate the sincerely held beliefs of not only Catholics, Protestants, anybody that has kind of a Christian or biblical worldview. So it isn't just something that's hypothetical. There are cases in the courts right now that are going to be affected by legislation that could possibly be passed or not passed by this legislative session. True?
No, you're absolutely right, Kerby. I mean, there's a case out of California where I believe it's a Catholic hospital that's been a part of litigation because someone wants to have a gender transition surgery and they want to force the Catholic hospitals to perform these surgeries. And, you know, we've seen this happen in the military as well. And so, you know, people have to appreciate that the number of hospitals out there are faith-based, and there should be limitations, and they should be able to stand up for their religious rights. And this is what I think is important for people to understand. When we talk about these Ban the Bible, sexual orientation, gender identity bills, these are bills where the government would force people to do things that they disagree with based on conscience or religious liberty. The government would fine you. The government would put you in the jail. The government would force you to engage in a type of activity that you think violates your religious beliefs, okay? It's not some neutral ground. And I think a lot of times people don't understand that. They think, well, if we just don't do anything, everything will be okay and the government will stay out of it. We're asking the government to stay out of it as well. That's what House Bill 1035 does. It says the government has to stay out of these decisions. The government has limitations on what they can do when they're trying to punish people because of their religious liberty rights. But there have been cases, and a lot of times you'll hear people say, well, you know, Jack Phillips won his case, everything's okay. You know, this was the Christian cake baker out of Colorado. Yeah, after 6 years,
yes,
he went to the U.S. Supreme Court. There have been other cases like his. Aaron and Melissa Klein out of Oregon, T-shirt makers, I think, in Kentucky and other parts of the state. There have been cases like these that have not had the U.S. Supreme Court address them, and they effectively lost their case and had to give up their business and stop doing what they were doing. And so while it's great that Jack Phillips won and the Colorado tried to sue him again, or they were in litigation again, and they finally have backed off of all of this, that does not mean it won't happen somewhere else where the facts are maybe just slightly different. And here's the way you solve this, is by putting it in law and not just trying to say, oh, well, there was this court case at one time. You put it in legislation and you make it permanent and clear that this should not happen to anyone else, not just in Colorado or Oregon, but the state of Texas as well.
Well, let's take a break. When we come back, again, you might want to write down House Bill 1035, and we've already talked about that. We'll come back and get into the issue of privacy in life, some of the other very important pro-family legislative priorities. But let me just real quickly encourage you to go to txvalues.org. Upper right-hand corner there is an opportunity for you to actually register and to attend this Wednesday, the Texas Faith and Family Day. David B. Wright, who we've had on the program with us many times before, 40 Days for Life, is one of the speakers, somebody that actually sits in my chair sometimes, and also as a guest. Lieutenant Colonel Alan West will be a speaker. It's sponsored by all sorts of various groups. There will be a briefing session in the Capitol Auditorium. Then there are office visits. There's a rally. and lunch, and it is so inexpensive, and it's just a great opportunity for you to go. Those of you that maybe have homeschool families, take the whole kids. They would really learn a great deal about government, and take any of your family, friends, and others. And so we'll come back and talk a little bit more about that, talk about a couple of other very important legislative priorities. But again, all of that you can find at our website, which is pointofview.net. Privileged to have with us just a little bit longer Jonathan Saenz with Texas Values. And if you find yourself saying, I want to learn a little bit more, simply click on the button next to his, and that will take you to all sorts of websites associated with Texas Values. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Hoosier State has taken steps to codify important religious liberty protections for Indiana's students. In April 2017, the Indiana General Assembly passed and its governor quickly signed a measure providing students with the chance to take an elective surveying the world's religions while outlining the civil liberties afforded to its students in Indiana's public schools. The new law provides each local school district the freedom to offer an elective course that will study the historical, cultural, and literary contributions of the world's major religions. At the same time, some of the critical civil liberties protected by the law include protecting a student's right to express their religious beliefs in class and class assignments, the right to pray before, during, and after the school day, and the right to access a school's facilities in the same manner that secular groups do. Of course, many of these protections are found in policies issued by the United States Department of Education. Nonetheless, it is encouraging to see a state dedicate significant legislative effort to religious liberty. Students should not be required to hide their faith at school, nor should they be punished for daring to discuss their religious beliefs while at school. Religious liberty should be our national priority. It's good to see that, at least for one state, it's a clear priority for their students. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Guide at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Jonathan Saenz with us for a few more minutes. And Jonathan, when we went to the break here, I spent just a few moments talking about what will happen at the Faith and Family Day on Wednesday. I would encourage all of our listeners, if they can make it down to Austin, to do so. But talk about some of the details. I mentioned the speakers. When does everything begin? How should they arrive? And what will happen during the time that they are with you?
Well, Kerby, we've got almost 400 people that have registered for this event. This is the largest event we're going to have at the Capitol all year during the legislative session. But if you go to texasfaithandfamily.com, you can register and get signed up. So what we're going to do is on Wednesday morning, we're going to start at 9 o'clock in the Capitol auditorium. We're going to talk to people about what are the current pieces of legislation that are being considered, the good, the bad, and then we're going to talk about the process. We're going to tell people how the legislative process works. we're going to be just, a few feet or so away from the offices of House and Senate members. And so we're going to have some elected officials that are going to come to that meeting that we have from 9 to 11. And then we're going to go walk over to some legislator offices and help people connect with their Texas House and Senate member. And then after that, we're going to have a rally on the south steps of the Capitol at noon. That's with David B. Wright and Colonel Allen West. And so that meeting point of the south steps of the Capitol, it's a very common place where you see rallies and events happen. And it's just a great place to get people's attention on what we're doing. And so that's one thing that happens during these days like this is people can collectively see a group. It draws a lot of attention. The media sees it. Elected officials see it. And it just lets people know that there's a lot of people that support these particular values and issues, and a lot of people have a shared concern. And so if the weather disrupts us a little bit, we might move a little bit earlier on the rally. But after that point, we've got a Chick-fil-A lunch. It's $5 for a box lunch, and you can hardly get lunch these days for $5 anywhere. But we're cutting you a little break and making it easy. So $5 gets you your box lunch for Chick-fil-A, which is kind of interesting, right? Because we don't want the government to ban entities like Chick-fil-A that are private companies from having their religious beliefs. And so it's not a form of protest that we're doing it on the state capitol, but we hope there's never a day where the government tries to ban, corporations like Chick-fil-A from doing business just because they're on the government property. But that has been an issue in other states where they've tried to ban Chick-fil-A from just operating at college campuses and things of that nature. But after that, about 1:15, 1:30, people have the rest of the day to go back into the Capitol, meet with their elected officials. We're going to be on hand to do that. And if you've never heard Colonel Allen West or David B. Wright speak in person, man, those guys are amazing, and you're in for a treat.
I would say so. Just before we run out of time, we did talk about religious freedom, but also some of your other legislative priorities were privacy and life. We have a situation right now where students are still at risk of being forced to share showers or locker rooms, bathrooms, and things of that nature. What are the possibilities of having some kind of protection for students in the state of Texas?
Well, I think the big threat on that issue is that there are all these bills that have been proposed that want the government to have more control over these type of issues in public schools and in public spaces. They even want to tell your private business how you can handle these issues when it comes to changing facilities and showers and locker rooms and bathrooms. And so we're fighting to make sure that those type of bills don't advance. I wouldn't think that they would, they'd have a hard time doing that, but we can't take anything for granted. And so we want to make sure also that kind of language doesn't pop up in other legislation, maybe on an amendment or somewhere, in some bill where people aren't expecting. So we're really keeping our eyes open for that. So if people see that, please let us know. And then on the life issue, a couple of these things came up last week. There was a bill that was filed on the Born Alive infant protection issue.
Right.
We've seen what New York did. We've seen what Virginia did. And so a bill was filed, House Bill 16 and Senate Bill 23 last week. That was by Representative Jeff Leach from the Plano area and also Senator Lois Kolkhorst from the Central Texas Brenham area. And that makes it clear that if a baby is born as a result of a botched abortion, if you will, that they have full protection of the law and that there is a medical and ethical standards that exist that should protect that innocent life. And the other thing I'll mention is our efforts to stop local governments from using our tax dollars to contract with or subsidize abortion entities. The city of Austin is trying to get around our state policy of not using tax dollars for abortion clinics by giving them a very sweetheart deal and allowing Planned Parenthood to rent a government building for $1 a year for 20 years with an option of another 20 years. And really the break that they're getting on rent amounts to almost $40 million by one estimate because of the value of this property.
Well, again, on your website, people will sometimes just say, are you actually trying to come up with solutions for which there's no problem? And again, you've got this whole list of bills which would force business owners to allow men into women's restrooms, bills that would change and take the words mother and father off birth certificates, bills that would actually force counselors to affirm the LGBT agenda. And of course, we've already talked about some of these issues of religious liberty, privacy, and the rest. And so that's why we appreciate you being kind of our eyes and ears down there. And it's just an opportunity to see what will take place. And so now it's getting into crunch time, isn't it? Because up until now, a lot of these bills are being filed. What happens if we don't pay attention is in this flurry of activity that takes place from now to about May, if you're not paying attention, and I know you guys are, some things can slip through that would be really disastrous for the people of the state of Texas.
You're absolutely right. And that's why we use the phrase a lot, government belongs to those who show up. So we're at the Capitol every day. I was there this morning. We've got a team of 10 people that are working with Texas Values and Texas Values Action. So we've always got one or two, if not more, people at the Capitol every day through all 140 days of legislative session. I was testifying in the Texas Senate this morning in a committee hearing as well on a bill that protects free speech rights of student clubs and groups on college campuses.
Very good.
And that be an issue where there's been concern. But that hearing started at 9 o'clock this morning, Kirby. And, if you didn't have your clock set right, you might have missed it. But we didn't. We were there. And but that's our role, and that's what we do. But the role that constituents and your listening audience plays is just as important as well. So if people see stuff that maybe we missed, let us know. But please come to the Capitol on our Faith and Family Day, or if you find another day where you could come, or send an email, make a phone call, but get engaged one way or another, because you're right. We're about halfway through the session. There's going to be a lot more committee hearings. They're going to be taking votes on the full Senate floor on some issues this week. Things are really going to start to move.
Well, again, we appreciate you being down there. We appreciate you giving us some time. I know it's been a busy media day, so thank you for giving us some time today here on Point of View.
God bless you. We'll talk to you soon, Kirby.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll get into a couple of issues. First of all, of course, I've talked about a few of the articles we've posted on the website. One of those, of course, is about the high price of no prices. We'll get to that maybe a little bit later again, and then some of the comments that came out of Austin. In this particular case from AOC, which we've already mentioned. But when we come back, we're also going to talk about a couple of other issues that I thought would be of interest, and that is from time to time, as you well know, we talk about the importance of Bible translation. And so we're going to be talking with an individual that has actually not only worked in that area, but is now reminding us of something else that I think is kind of exciting, and that is because of these Bible translation events, not only are we getting more Bibles in other languages, but it's also helping prevent various languages from just going extinct. There are, if you will, endangered languages. And so having a language, having an alphabet, having words and printed will allow us to keep some of those languages that have existed really since the beginning. And so we're going to talk about that briefly and then get into some other topics. And as I mentioned in the third hour, we're going to focus a lot of time and attention on the subject of evangelism. Larry Moyer of EvanTell will be with us as well. So you can find all sorts of material related to everything we'll be talking about today on our website, pointofview.net. As you go there, my Viewpoints commentary is on Venezuela, if you'd like to print it out. And of course, if you would be interested in traveling with us to Israel, that takes place in October. We have a banner there as well. Let's take a break. We've got a lot more to cover, and we will do so right after this.
The leader looked around the table, motioning to the older men. He said, "You're here to remind us how faithful God has been in the past. Now, you middle-aged guys, you keep us focused on what God is doing right now. Make sure we don't stop. And you younger guys, keep us looking forward. Imagine what God wants us to be doing in the years to come." There's a lot of wisdom there. We have to be thankful for the past, focused on the present, and mindful to plan for a great future. Many listeners have made bold moves to partner with Point of View Radio and accomplish great things for more than 45 years. But as we look around, we do see many positive things, and I think we can all admit there's a lot more to be done. It's time to think about your next bold move, what you can do to invest for our nation's future. Be thinking about that. If you have an answer now, don't wait. Make your next bold move now. Give online at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. It's our future. The time is now. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. We have a lot to cover over the next couple of hours, and I certainly appreciate you joining us today. Just a little bit, we'll get into this whole idea of health care again. The reason for that is the Trump administration is now considering a rule that would require doctors and hospitals to disclose the rates they negotiate with insurance companies. This would be a step towards what I call healthcare transparency. So I want to get into that a little bit later this hour. Also, maybe take on that issue, is healthcare a right? So one of the articles you will see is by Kevin Williamson, although I also have some commentaries coming out on that, so we'll get into those topics in just a minute. And also we've posted a piece, which we might get to today. We'll see if we can. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was at South by Southwest Festival in Austin, making all sorts of statements about everything from Ronald Reagan to capitalism and socialism. And it just seems to me that we ought to at least respond to a few. Not to be critical of her. I mean, she has a right to say whatever she wants to say, and we have a right to point out some of the factual errors there. And one of the things that we talk about so often, especially since she's promoting socialism, is the need for you to maybe get a copy of the booklet that we've produced on capitalism and socialism. Of course, we also have my book on Christians and economics. That's the one in English. This is the one in Spanish. So whether you have somebody that speaks English or Spanish, we have these books on this subject and really addressing some of those from a biblical point of view. So we will get to those in just a minute. But I thought for a few minutes we would spend some time talking about the good work that is done for our friends at Wycliffe Bible Translators. You might not be aware, but the United Nations actually declared this year, 2019, as the International Year of Indigenous Languages, to preserve languages that are in decline. And so one of the articles I've posted here talks about how this new technology is making it much more effective and efficient to actually translate the Bible into many of these languages that have never had the Bible before. But there's another aspect of that which maybe you would not be aware of. We have some endangered languages that maybe just simply go extinct. By creating an alphabet, by creating a language, we can perpetuate those, and I think that's going to be very significant as well. So we bring to the microphone Andy Keener. He is the Senior Director of Global Partnerships for Wycliffe Bible Translators. And Andy, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Great to be with you, Kerby.
Talk for just a minute, because one of the articles I've posted here is about this new technology. We remember the old days, at least I'm the old guy around the table, when, you know, somebody would go there and maybe if they had a laptop computer, they were lucky, but you would learn the language, you go through this long, tedious process, and eventually we'd have a New Testament in this new language. Eventually you'd have a Bible in this new language that for the first time had never been available. But this technology now allows you to do that a lot more effectively and efficiently. True?
Yeah, there's a lot of different technological pieces that we've been able to incorporate and build specifically for Bible translation that have, in some senses, sped up the process of Bible translation, but also raised the quality so that we make sure more than ever that what is translated is really well done and really accurately represents what the original content was.
Well, again, I just think it's really exciting. We've posted that article. But let's get into this issue because I think it's fair to say that about half of the world's population speak one of the kind of the top 23 major languages. But that would suggest then that about 90% of the languages spoken today around the world could eventually go extinct. Give us some facts and figures and perspective on what's taking place there.
Over the last, most people, if you ask people how many languages are there in the world, some might say, 20 or 30, maybe 100. There's actually about 7,000 languages around the world today. And roughly a third of those are endangered. And by endangered, we mean these languages have been spoken historically in communities. In some cases, people are moving to cities and they're being incorporated into other languages, and their children just grow up speaking that majority language, and the language of their parents and their grandparents is just not spoken anymore. And we're just seeing a lot of increase in the loss of languages over the last century. And as we look forward, those trends seem to be showing that there'll be a considerable reduction in languages spoken even as we move through this century.
And what I understand is an endangered language becomes extinct about every 2 weeks. And so when you realize that that's tied into the history, the culture, the knowledge, maybe even some perspective. I mean, you get, as you learn other languages, different perspectives or ways to look at something, because language does affect the way we perceive the world. And so we lose those languages forever. And that is, I think, a really sad commentary. And so in some respects, what you're doing at Wycliffe is allowing some of those languages to continue in some kind of written form, right?
Yeah, we do. As we're doing Bible translation, many times we're working with languages that don't have an alphabet. They have a spoken language. It's a robust, rich language, and yet no one has ever taken the time, done the study and the research necessary to actually reduce it into writing, to figure out what the sounds are and what letters are needed or what symbols. Not all the languages around the world, because of where they are, use our alphabet, the Roman alphabet. They use others, but it's never happened. And as we do Bible translation, in order to write the scriptures so that they can be read by people, we need an alphabet. And so a lot of our folks are well-trained as linguists to do that analysis. My wife and I actually worked in the country of Panama. We began our work there by understanding the language, learning to speak it, and then learning to work with local folks to understand all the different sound systems and reduce it to writing, so that now today they have a written language, not just the spoken language. And those sorts of things help a language develop over time into areas that it wasn't used before. And one of the things we see is where languages are on that drift toward being reduced in their usage over time, that engagement like this in Bible translation and creating alphabets with people in those communities can help reverse those trends.
And again, when we come back from the break, we'll talk a little bit more about maybe a couple very concrete examples, one from Panama, one from South Sudan, just to give you an illustration of that. Then we're going to move on to some of the other topics. But you might say, well, why does it go extinct? Well, first of all, if you don't have an alphabet, you don't have a language written down, then the possibility of passing it on in formal education doesn't exist. Then a lot of those situations, and I've run into that before when I've been in Asia and other places, they were probably multilingual, so they'll use the major language of the region, and as eventually the language that is becoming obsolete just ceases to exist. And so there are just a number of things associated with this, and I just thought you might be interested in finding out a little bit more about that, especially since the United Nations this year has made this the International Year of Indigenous Languages. And as he points out, we are talking about not a couple of dozen, but probably about 7,000 languages, and about a third of those could be endangered. And if you've ever been to the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C., there it gives you a visual representation of what it's like, because there in one room they have a Bible in each language where it's been translated, but then you have some other placekeepers for languages that don't have a Bible yet. And you begin to see how important it is to have the Bible in every language of every person in the world. So we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about that. I think very highly, of course, of the work done by Wycliffe, and we'll come back and spend some more time talking with Andy Keener, and then we'll move on to some other issues in the news. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Venezuela is in a total economic and humanitarian disaster. Inflation is rampant. The inflation rate has already exceeded 2 million%. All supplies, including toilet paper, are in short supply. Medicine is unavailable in most of the country, and food shortages, along with a crumbling economy, have forced people to change their eating habits. All are losing weight and battling malnutrition in what has come to be known as the Maduro diet. President Nicolas Maduro is one of the reasons for the economic devastation, along with the previous policies of Hugo Chavez. If you needed an object lesson on why socialism is bad for a country and its people, you need look no further than Venezuela. The economic resources are there. The husband of one of my colleagues used to travel to Venezuela with the major oil companies, which brought prosperity to many in the country. But the Chavez government started taking majority stake in various oil projects, and oil companies from the U.S. and Europe left the country. Oil prices dropped, and today we have a crisis so bad that people are eating out of garbage cans and catching and eating zoo animals, dogs, cats, and birds. Trying to get humanitarian aid to the people is difficult. Maduro has blocked aid from crossing the border, arguing that it could be a potential Trojan horse that would lead to military intervention. Earlier this year, the leader of the legislature, Juan Guaido, declared himself to be the acting president and has been backed by the Trump administration. Vice President Mike Pence declared to the people of Venezuela, "We are with you, we stand with you, and will stay with you until democracy is restored." He's also called for leaders in other countries to join the U.S. He said there can be no bystanders in Venezuela's struggle for freedom. We need to pray for our leaders and pray for the people in Venezuela who are suffering through this crisis. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Thinking Man Films, Patterns of Evidence, The Moses Controversy. Did Moses write the first books of the Bible? Patterns of Evidence in theaters March 14th, 16th, and 19th only.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Andy Keener with us for a few more minutes, and if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Senior Director of Global Partnerships for Wycliffe Bible Translators. And one of the things, I guess, question that maybe some people would have, Andy, is, okay, how, when Wycliffe is involved in Bible translation, how does that then prevent some of those languages from going extinct? You sort of alluded to that, but let's go into some of the details of how that actually works out.
Yeah, when a lot of people are using their traditional languages, there can be a sense of, well, my language isn't good as this majority language because that's the language of government. It must be better than mine. And when you can see God's word written in your own language, when you can listen to audio in your own language and say, wait a minute, those are the words of God, it begins to change your opinion of your own language and give you a greater sense of pride. If God can communicate to me in my language, then I guess I can use my language for anything. That's one really powerful way that we've seen people change their attitude towards their traditional language.
And what you found is that sometimes as these initial Bible stories are translated, then whole books, then eventually the New Testament, the Old Testament, it kind of opens up a whole new arena for the language to flourish, doesn't it?
Exactly, because now people see, if I can use my language in church, if I can use it in prayer, if I can sing in my language, why can't I use it in my business? Why can't I use it in the schools? And we've seen places where people have then gone and said to the government, hey, our language is worth something. We'd like you to use it in the schools so that our children can learn first in our language and then also in the national language. Most folks aren't against multilingualism. They just they get that sense of pride about their own language and they want to hold on to it as well.
Any idea so far of how many languages maybe you've been able to rescue from extinction?
It's really hard to look at that and make that judgment, just because when you engage, you don't know what would have happened had you not engaged.
Sure.
And so we see the places where we've been and what is happening, where people are more and more, they've gotten storybooks in their own language and scripture in their own language. And in many of those places, we see it being used in radio programs now. We see it being used in the schools. And so we see languages flourishing that just 2 or 3 decades ago, we would have questioned, will this language survive?
Oh.
We haven't tracked all the data, but we see it happening.
Well, let's look at a couple of examples. I know you have one example we've sort of already mentioned in passing. Let's go into more detail. This particular people group in Panama.
Yeah, my wife and I actually worked in Panama and worked with the Chiribe people. They're about a group of about 4,000 that live in the jungles of northwestern Panama. And for years, there was evangelism done there. There was education. The government came in and forced people to go to school, and everything was done in Spanish. My wife and I, along with some colleagues from the organization now known as Ethnos 360, a church planting organization, went there. We focused on the Bible translation. And as we worked with local folks, we had 5 of them that were chosen and trained to be Bible translators along with us. And as we were working on that, we developed an alphabet with leaders in their community. They also began to teach people to read. And what happened over time was people began to appreciate their language like never before. One simple example is a man came to me one time and he said, "Why do you bother doing things in my language? Why don't you just do it in Spanish? That's a much better language." And I said, "Don't you realize how complex your language is?" He says, "Oh, not like Spanish." Well, each of their verbs has over 200 different forms. And I told him that. He didn't believe me until I showed him a piece of paper and I said, here's one of your verbs, printed out all the forms. And he goes, "It can't be that complicated." And as I pointed word by word, he looked and he's like, "Wait, I know that word. I know that word. I know that word. You mean I know all of these words?" And I said, "Yeah, you do." He said, "Wow, I never realized my language was so rich." So just that process of working with language creates that pride. And today, their language not only has the New Testament and significant portions of the Old Testament, and people are using it in their churches, but also the government has now come in and is starting using their language in the elementary school system. So it's exciting to see that change happen there.
Another example I think I've heard is that the parents would try not to even speak the language with their kids because, after all, the push was your kids go to the government-run school. They have to learn Spanish. So we probably confuse them, so we won't even speak the language to our children. But now that you have that language being used in the schools in some cases, and they have a pride about their language, it also, of course, gives them a sense of ownership and pride about their ethnic group, doesn't it?
It does. And we've seen parents change their attitudes to some degree about that, where they'll say, wait a minute, my kids need to know our language too. Maybe they can learn both. We had a neighbor who had grown up in a household where his parents wouldn't allow him to speak the local language. And then one day he said, wait a minute, you speak my language. You as a foreigner speak my language better than I do. I won't have that. So he decided, I'm going to go learn how to speak the language of my parents and grandparents.
What a great story.
And today his kids, too, are learning to speak that language.
Let's talk about at least one more example, and that one comes from a people group there in South Sudan.
Yeah, the Calico are a group from South Sudan. South Sudan's a place that has seen war when it was Sudan, and
yes,
even now there's a lot of persecution. But back in 1985, there was a pastor who was at a conference, and he realized, wait a minute, other people have God's word, but it's not available in my language, and the language hadn't even been written down yet. And so he sought out others working in Bible translation, and Wycliffe and one of our field partners, SIL, began to support what he had in mind. And we began to work with him and he with us. And over many years, through a lot of hardship, they now have the gospel, the full New Testament available in their language. And they've written their language down. And it's just exciting to see how people were so excited to see what they can have in their own language available to them.
You know, if I remember right, and I think I've got this in the notes here, that New Testament was like the 1000th translation of Wycliffe and SIL. And now you realize that it took 67 years for the first 500. It took only 17 years for the next 500. And with all this new technology and mobilizing individuals, I see that Bible translation is taking place at a faster and more efficient and effective and accurate rate than ever before.
We are living in an era of the greatest acceleration of Bible translation in the history of mankind. And it is so exciting, like you said, to see what's happened in the past, and we celebrate that. We celebrate those 67 years to get to 500 New Testaments translated, and then going from 500 to 1,000 in just an additional 17 years as all of the work over many years is now coming to fruition. But we also look to the future for the roughly 2,000 languages ahead that we believe still need Bible translation done in them, and roughly 2,000 where it's being done today, and seeing those come to fruition. So we expect that more and more people will have greater and greater access to God's Word as we move forward, and it's exciting to be a part of it.
Well, Andy, appreciate you being with us today. And this is probably something most of our listeners did not know, that we have endangered languages and that Wycliffe is doing their part to prevent those languages from going extinct. At the same time, of course, putting the Bible in the language of those natives and those particular indigenous people groups. So I appreciate you giving us some time today here on Point of View.
Thanks for the opportunity to share.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, let me get into a couple of issues. One is this issue of health care transparency. You know, I use as an illustration just even what happened last week, and that is I went to a doctor for a checkup and also took my family out to dinner. Well, you know, when we went to dinner, as a consumer, I noticed something very different because there was total transparency at the restaurant. I could open up a menu. I could see the prices. Could also see the pictures. So I knew what it was going to be like when those particular meals were brought to our table. Also knew what it was going to cost. I'd already sort of done a mental calculation of a tip even before the bill was there because I knew exactly what it was going to cost. Well, a few days before I went to a doctor's office, I had no idea what those procedures would cost, even as the doctor was going over some of the tests that they would run on my blood work. There was no mention of cost. You know, we'll do this test, we'll do this test. I didn't know what I was going to pay until I went to the receptionist's desk and received the verdict. And fortunately, because I've been there before, there was no sticker shock. But this Trump administration idea is one that wants to change that. And this would actually require administrators and others to disclose what they negotiate with insurance companies. And I think this would be kind of a small step in the direction of health care transparency. So we're going to come back and talk about that. First article we've posted there by Kevin Williamson, The High Price of No Prices. And I'd love to get your comments as well, because in the past it's always been argued, well, you're not paying for it anyway. I don't know about you, but I suspect you are like me. You probably have such high deductibles, you are paying for it. And I think it's important for us to know what we would pay when we go to a doctor's office, when we go to a hospital. So maybe you have some thoughts about that. I'm going to give you my thoughts when we come back. But if you'd like to join our conversation today as we talk about health care transparency for a few minutes, certainly want to encourage you to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. Might also get into this whole idea of whether health care is a right. Some of the candidates for the presidency are saying it's a right, so we'll talk about that as well. 1-800-351-1212. We'll talk about health care right after this.
Question: do you have a health insurance plan you are not happy with? Well, Bethany and Jason thought they were stuck. Their plan just kept getting more expensive, and Bethany's favorite doctor didn't even take that plan anymore. And then some friends at church told them about MediShare.
With our previous insurance, we were paying $1,200 a month. With MediShare, we now pay around $600 a month.
Yes, they're paying $600 less per month, and that's a pretty typical savings with MediShare. And they actually like MediShare more.
I was able to go back to my original doctor that I absolutely loved, and it's just been an absolutely beautiful thing being a part of MediShare.
Yeah, so they pay a lot less and they like it more. No wonder MediShare is growing so fast. Find out more. They're super easy to talk to. All you have to do is call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let me just mention that one of the things I want to talk about for a few minutes is this decision that is about ready to be made by the Trump administration, which would require doctors and hospitals to disclose the rates they negotiate with insurance companies. I've posted this article by Kevin Williamson. I have a commentary coming out in the future that gets into it in more detail. And I love what he says near the end. He says, you know, this is the right thing to do because some of the hospital lobbyists are having a fit about this. And I recognize that you can't always give a perfect, accurate estimate because there are variabilities in surgeries and things like that. I got that. So when people say we can't do it, well, we can't give a perfect price like you can for a menu item on a restaurant. I recognize that. But you can certainly give a range. And for people that say this is not going to be significant, let me use an example that I used 2 years ago. I've written on this before, and 2 years ago, I used my own example in where I happen to live, which is Collin County, which is a county north of Dallas. And there was a study that was done looking at all the hospitals in Collin County and finding out what the cost would be for heart bypass. At that time, this is 2 years ago, $164,000 was the average. But one medical center in the area was charging nearly $80,000 more for the same procedure. Now, oftentimes what happens is that there are individuals that say, you know, I've got an emergency. I can't comparison shop. Got that. Figured that out a long time ago. But when you have that option and when people don't know what it costs, you can see part of the difficulty. And so the issue of transparency is part of the problem. The other problem, of course, is the fact that someone else is paying for it. And I use the example, you know, I went out to a restaurant. I knew what it was going to cost even before I got the bill. And I could even estimate what the tip might be, and I knew what it was going to look like. But, you know, let's change that. Imagine if somebody handed me their credit card and said, oh, I want your family to have a nice dinner. Don't worry about the cost. Well, my family's going to spend a lot more time paying attention to the left side of the menu, what's on the menu, and maybe less attention on the right side of the menu, what it costs. And so you can see that. And Kevin Williamson points that out because he says, you know, Milton Friedman, the famous economist, put it this way. You can spend money in 4 ways. Number 1, spend your own money on yourself. Number 2, spend someone else's money on yourself. Number 3, spend your money on someone else. Number 4, spend someone else's money on someone else. And the point is the most efficient way is number 1, where we spend it on ourselves. But we love number 2, where we're spending somebody else's money on ourselves. And, of course, politicians love number 4, where they are spending somebody else's money on someone else, and you go down the list. And that is an issue. And he says in the end of his piece here, just imagine if you were to purchase a car. He said, you know, you decide to buy a car. You find out what your Honda Civic costs when you get the bill. It might be $20,000. It could be $350,000. Well, he's being a little hyperbole there, but I understand what he's saying. And some other guy may or may not be able to pay for some of it, depending on the deal your employer negotiated on behalf of 7 years before you joined the company. Nobody would tolerate that. Nobody would seriously be expected to. And so it's a question that is now before the Trump administration, and it's a question I put on the table. Do you think this greater transparency makes some sense? And the argument before is, well, someone else is paying for it. But I don't know about you, but I know for me, these high deductibles mean I'm paying for it. And so I think it's all the more reason to begin to evaluate what you're going to pay before you pay it, rather than when you show up at the receptionist table or the bookkeeper's venue at the hospital. So I'd love to get some comments. What has been your experience in terms of healthcare transparency and healthcare cost transparency? We'll start out in Georgia, WAGP. Julie, thank you for joining us today. What's your point of view?
Hey, Kerby. Thanks for taking my call. I do agree with you about it's past time that we drill down and to see what these costs are. It doesn't matter who's paying for it. In the long run, in the whole scheme, I think we're all paying.
Yes, we are.
To be wise with our spending, it should really be transparent what we're spending with doctor visits, procedures, hospitals, and so on. Just like the whole idea about buying a car, you get an invoice, a statement, you know what you're paying, you can negotiate it, but all the other fees, the tag, title, all that's written there. You know what you're doing. You even know how much you're financing and what it's going to cost you. Well, it's the same if you're buying a house. Number one, most expensive thing people buy, and you have a HUD statement at the closing, breaks it down, what you're paying, what the seller buyer, what the real estate broker's getting, all the way down to the bottom line. And I just think with the healthcare industry, how many years have we gone knowing we're overcharged for bandages and little incidentals, and we have no choice. It's pay it. It doesn't matter how good insurance you have, somebody's still paying it, and I think it drives up the cost for everybody when we're overpaying it, and we have no voice, we have no choice. It's just not right.
I think you've
not a good way to spend money.
Made a very good case for it. So, Julie, I appreciate your calling. And one of the things that Kevin Williamson talks about is that some people say, well, yeah, but, we have, he talks about handbags and everything else, but I love one of his lines. The market for chemotherapy is different in important ways from the market for fancy handbags. Though there are exceptions, most healthcare services are heavily location dependent. You can order a pair of shoes from Singapore, but you probably aren't going to go there for a checkup or a tonsillectomy. Got that. The fact that healthcare is largely immune from offshoring is one of the reasons why that field, along with government, education, a few others, are relatively strong wage and employment growth, while other sectors are more vulnerable to offshoring. That's great for providers, but not for consumers. In other words, the bottom line is you're obviously not going to go offshore, or you're not going to be able to purchase your chemotherapy or other kinds of things by simply getting somebody from China or Singapore or somebody from India to do that. So I get that. So there is that sense in which it is the case. But at the same time, as Julie was pointing out just a minute ago, have you ever received one of your bills and you look down there and they're saying, they charge that for cotton balls, they charge that for cotton swabs, they charge that for a EKG that I wasn't even sure I wanted? It does seem to me that somewhere along the line, a little bit more transparency is necessary, which leads to the next question that almost everybody asks. Why is it only now that this is even being discussed? And that has to do with the fact that whether you like President Donald Trump or not, he's not beholden to too many people. Imagine if a lot of your campaign was funded by insurance groups, by hospital groups, and by physicians associations and things like that. They're going to say, we just really don't want you to do this. And is one of the successes, if you will, of the Trump candidacy and now the Trump administration. Questions that you and I would think, why haven't we talked about this until now, are simply not necessarily being discussed. And so this is something that the Trump administration is considering, which is why I thought we might focus some time and attention on it. Yes, we'll get back to the Mueller investigation. We have to wait 2 weeks for the report to come out anyway. But sometimes I like to focus on things that affect you, your faith, your family, and your freedom. And this gets back to your family, your cost, the economy, your freedom, and a variety of other things. And I do think it is really important. So when we come back, I want to also take on one other issue. By the way, I'll take some more phone calls too, 1-800-351-1212. And that is, there are various individuals right now that are proposing that health care is a right. It sounds good. We hear Bernie Sanders saying that. We see Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Matter of fact, I've posted her piece on what she said at South by Southwest Festival in Austin. But is it, first of all, a right? And my argument is it's not a right if we understand what rights mean. But even if you accept that flawed view of what rights are, you still have a major problem. And so I've got a commentary coming out this week that you can read in more detail. But we're going to come back and talk about whether we should have a transparent healthcare system in terms of pricing. And then, is healthcare really a right? Because it's certainly not the kinds of rights that we have, for example, in the Declaration of Independence that gives us an unalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So we're going to talk about the difference between the kinds of rights being proposed now versus the rights that are actually written into our Declaration or our Constitution. And then even if you accept that view, there's just another problem because these resources are economically scarce, and that works against you as well. So if nothing else, we want to come back and give a few more of you a chance to join the conversation. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Hoosier State has taken steps to codify important religious liberty protections for Indiana's students. In April 2017, the Indiana General Assembly passed and its governor quickly signed a measure providing students with the chance to take an elective surveying the world's religions while outlining the civil liberties afforded to its students in Indiana's public schools. The new law provides each local school district the freedom to offer an elective course that will study the historical, cultural, and literary contributions of the world's major religions. At the same time, some of the critical civil liberties protected by the law include protecting a student's right to express their religious beliefs in class and class assignments, the right to pray before, during, and after the school day, and the right to access a school's facilities in the same manner that secular groups do. Of course, many of these protections are found in policies issued by the United States Department of Education. Nonetheless, it is encouraging to see a state dedicate significant legislative effort to religious liberty. Students should not be required to hide their faith at school, nor should they be punished for daring to discuss their religious beliefs while at school. Religious liberty should be our national priority. It's good to see that, at least for one state, it's a clear priority for their students. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Guide at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And once again, talking about this rule that is being considered by the Trump administration for greater healthcare transparency. Let's be fair, this one would only be a small step in that direction, but a step in the right direction, I believe, and I'd love to hear your comments. So let's go back. If you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll go to the phones, and I believe it's Maine. Rebecca, thank you for calling today.
Thank you so much for having me. I disagree with you. I think it's a huge step forward. I had to have foot x-ray. I injured my foot, and I After a few weeks, it wasn't getting better. I went to the foot doctor. He sent me to the hospital to have an x-ray. I asked them how much it would be. They wouldn't tell me, and I said, look, you know how much you pay my insurance. How much is this going to be? I persisted. They finally told me it was going to be $350, and like you, I have high deductible. I called around. I found a half a mile from my house, $100, newer equipment.
There you go.
I highly, highly recommend people call around, because, especially for something that's not an emergency, because the price difference is huge.
It is. And again, you made a very good point. I talked about just a minute ago this issue of a heart bypass. The reason I say it's small is because right now the rule is pretty limited just in terms of how the hospitals and doctors negotiate with insurance companies. It's not what you and I would like, where we would walk in and it'd say, X-ray, $350, and go in the other one, X-ray, $100. So we're not there yet, but at least it's a step towards something which maybe not going to look like a menu that you get in a restaurant, but I still think it's a step in the right direction, and you've given us a perfect example of that. A difference between $350 and $100, that means a lot to me.
I don't see why it can't be a menu. You could put like McDonald's, Blue Cross, United Healthcare, et cetera, this is the price for your different insurances. For a simple thing like an x-ray, you should be able to know that.
I totally agree with you. I'm just recognizing the hue and cry we're hearing from some of the lobbyists right now over this, what I think is a relatively limited rule. But Rebecca, thank you for calling. You just made my case. And maybe I'll use that in a future commentary. But let me give a few more of you a chance to join our conversation. So we'll head out to Arizona this time. Bob, what would you like to say?
It's not quite as simple as just putting a price on what you receive. If you go to the grocery store, you buy a loaf of bread for $2. That's what the cost is. But with an healthcare cost, you got other people involved. If you price the bread at $2, the insurance company or Medicare and Medicaid come in and says, we're only going to pay you 30 cents.
Yeah.
And so the doctor, he bumps his price way up, so he gets his $2 for his loaf of bread.
You've, again, raised another reason why a lot of people are saying this is going to be difficult to implement completely, because there's so many things on the back end that are invisible to the average consumer, in this case, the patient. And that's exactly why I say I recognize we may not get to total transparency, but I'll take anything that moves us a little closer, don't you think?
I think you need to get their second-party payer out of there.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Healthcare costs have been going up ever since insurance came in, paying for it, when the employer pays for the insurance, when Medicare and Medicaid come in. Medical costs was going up about the rate of inflation. But my theory is, when you have a bigger corn pile, and that's the insurance companies, the money is there, Medicaid and Medicaid, you have more rats.
Yeah, you certainly do. Bob, I appreciate your comments, and this illustrates, if nothing else, why I just think that we need to, and Bob said that what I've said before, and that is, let's just get that middleman out of there, whether it's an insurance company or, of course, the solution that comes right now from Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and 16 other Democrats in the U.S. Senate is, no, we need to go to Medicare for all. In which you have then bureaucrats get involved in there. And, of course, there is the issue as well. And if nothing else, just illustrating again some of the intelligent listeners we have here at Point of View. Well, just before we take a break, and I might mention as a program note, we're going to have Larry Moyer in studio. We're going to talk about evangelism. Very concerned about something we sort of talked about off air with Paul Baraka when he was here last week, about how even some of these mission organizations are de-emphasizing evangelism. Larry's going to be talking about how some of the seminaries aren't even wanting to teach evangelism, and we'll get into some of the reasons for that. But just before we do that, the other aspect of this issue in terms of healthcare pricing and healthcare transparency is what we're hearing now during, essentially, the presidential campaign has begun. Let's face it, we have all sorts of Democratic nominees that are looking for the possibility, or candidates, I should say, looking to be the nominee, probably a better way to say it. And they're all talking about health care is a right. And it comes off the tongue and it sounds, of course, health care is a right. And we've even had the United Nations saying that the health care is a right. You know what? First of all, it's not. The Declaration of Independence, when it says you have an inalienable right to life, liberty, or the pursuit of happiness, it doesn't mean that people have to give us life or people have to make us happy. It's understood as what you might call a negative right. You have a right not to be killed, unless maybe you're an unwanted unborn child, or you have the right not to lose your liberties, unless you're a conservative on a campus. You know, I'm being facetious here, but those are what we call negative rights. But the left is now proposing what would be called positive rights. You have the right to housing, the right to health care, the right maybe to free college education. And that's not how we've understood rights in America. But there's a second issue that I've talked about as well. It isn't just that you have an improper view of rights, but let's just for the moment, for a debate, concede the other side. Let's assume that that flawed view is right. I don't think that it is, but I'll concede the point just to make another point. Even if you assume that you have a right to health care, how do you have a right to something that is economically scarce? This gets back into my books on economics. You know, I have this book, Christians and Economics, in English, and then I have it also in Spanish. And I talk about the fact that when you talk about things like health care or other economic values, they are by definition scarce. You don't think so? Well, how does everyone have a right to kidney dialysis when we don't have enough kidney dialysis machines? How does someone have a right to a doctor when there are more people who want a personal physician than there are doctors to go around? So even if you accept this flawed view, and I don't, but even if you do, you have to say that health care can't possibly be considered a right like these other rights that are in our Constitution. But just before we take a break, just because I reject the idea that health care is a right doesn't mean that I dismiss the importance of health care. Actually, just the opposite. You just heard me talk about the fact that I think we need health care transparency. Just the opposite. Because we are concerned about providing quality health care, we think that's so important that it shouldn't be left to bureaucrats working in an incompetent government agency which has not been able to deliver those things. And so, again, even though a lot of people are campaigning right now that health care is a right and campaigning for Medicare for all, really what it would be is VA for all, because that's much closer to what it would look like. And ask people that are going to the VA. Some might say they had a good experience. Most of them aren't going to tell you that they did. And so that's a debate we can have for another day, but I just wanted you to read this piece that we've posted today, The High Price of No Prices, as well as some of the comments by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez at the South by Southwest Festival, once again criticizing this whole issue of capitalism. And this is why we always like to make available to you the little booklet we have on capitalism and socialism so that you can understand that and maybe help educate some of your children and grandchildren. So a lot of this material is available on our website today, and if you'd like more, you can contact us as well. My commentary today is on the crisis in Venezuela. Of course, we have a banner link there to our trip to Israel, which we talked about last week, taking place in October, and all of that is available at the website pointofview.net. Larry Moyer in studio with us as we talk about evangelism right after these important messages.
From Thinking Man Films and Fathom Events comes Patterns of Evidence, the Moses Controversy. A new documentary follows investigative filmmaker Timothy Mahoney's faith-affirming journey throughout the Middle East in search of scientific evidence that Moses wrote the first books of the Bible.
The Lord said to Moses, write this in a book.
Patterns of Evidence, the Moses Controversy. In theaters March 14th, 16th, and 19th only. More information is available at patternsofevidence.com/Moses.
Is there a lot of free time in your schedule? Probably not. Most of us are on the go all the time, and Point of View is ready to go with you no matter where on the go is. Visit the App Store for your phone or tablet and search for Point of View Radio. Our app lets you listen or watch anytime it's convenient for you. And since we're told to be doers, not just listeners, the app provides a quick way to take action on the issues we're talking about. You can send us a question, find a local radio station, read articles, listen and share Kerby's viewpoints commentaries. It's a lot of impact in one little free app. Visit the App Store today, right now, and download the Point of View Radio app. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me this hour. We're going to spend some time talking about evangelism in a variety of different ways, partially because we are concerned about the de-emphasis of evangelism. We've seen this in a number of different ways in terms of various institutions no longer teaching about evangelism. We've seen this with the millennial generation saying maybe evangelism isn't something we should really be involved with. And even last week when we had Paul Baraka in studio, he gave us some information about the fact that as an individual heading up a mission agency, he's been concerned that he's seen a shift from evangelism and church planting to meeting human needs. Now, I'm all about meeting human needs. After all, mission organizations over the years have built hospitals and schools and churches and all sorts of things, and nothing wrong with standing up and fighting sexual trafficking and the rest. But if that supplants and causes a decrease in evangelism, that's an issue as well. Well, I bring to the microphone a good friend, has been on the program with us many times before, Dr. Larry Moyer, and he is a graduate of Dallas Theological Seminary, Gordon Conwell Seminary, to mention just a few, has even an additional honorary doctorate, is the founder of EvanTell, and he is here in the Dallas area and is joining me in studio. So, Larry, good to have you with us again.
Thank you. Good to be with you, Kerby.
I can remember a couple of times in the past where you and I have led people to the Lord over the air, so that's been kind of fun.
That was exciting. That was exciting, Kerby.
And again, anybody that has been involved in evangelism probably knows the organization, but for just a minute, before we get into the bad news, let's talk about the fact that you founded this organization decades and decades ago to really encourage people in evangelism. Tell us a little bit more about EvanTell.
Yeah, EvanTell is Evangelistic Association. Everything we do is reaching out to non-Christians with the gospel of Christ, and then training believers in evangelism. Everything we do is evangelizing and training others in evangelism. Last year we had our 45th anniversary, and we've been privileged to present the gospel now to just over 38 million people.
Wow.
And we've had 750,000 trainings in evangelism.
Yes.
And so our goal for as we go towards our 50th year is to present the gospel to 50 million and have 1 million trainings in evangelism.
Yes.
We're worldwide, headquartered here in Dallas, but been doing it for this May will be 46 years, and couldn't be any more excited than I am right now, Kerby.
And I might just mention, too, we have in the past talked about some of these very creative ways. You love to hunt, and to have hunters and men get together for doing an evangelistic opportunity. That's been, I think, something that's very exciting to me as well, in addition to, of course, the church trainings and those kinds of things. So we have, of course, a link to evantell.org. We also have a link to your website, Larry Moyer website, and we'll also be talking about the toolbox in just a minute. But talk about the different venues that you've created for individuals to not only learn about evangelism, but to bring their unsafe friends to them.
Well, I did crusades for 20 years, Kerby, 73 to 93, and often we were packed by closing night. I'm convinced the message never changes. The method has to. Even Billy Graham in later years said if you're starting over, you'd have to do it differently.
Yeah.
And the message never changed. The method has to. Went to a concept called friendship dinners, where we averaged about 40% at a restaurant type of setting. Then in 2009, I came to Christ through the sport of hunting.
Yes.
Kerby. And in 2009, someone said to me, why are you not speaking at Wild Game Feast? You'd be a natural. I mean, you're an avid hunter. You've had great success. You came to Christ through hunting. I came to Christ through hunting. That's what brought me to Christ, Kerby. And I said, because I have no burden for Christian hunters. All the ones I knew of, they did for the men in their church.
Yeah.
And so they said, why don't you devise outreach for non-Christians? And Kerby, it's become one of our most exciting outreaches. Often our problem is enough space to accommodate the people that want to come. It's a Saturday night. Your feast is like 6 to 7. My presentation is 7 to 8. I show over 140 hunting pictures, give my testimony, hunting wildlife and finding God. And 8 to 9 are the door prizes. Because if you own Curry's Hardware, how would you like your name mentioned in front of 500 people?
Yeah. And so again, it's just an incredible opportunity, and we'll talk more about those venues because I want people to see that we have solutions to the problems we're going to talk about. But let's get into it. You and I used to share an office at Dallas Seminary. We never saw each other at the office, which says a lot about how busy we were, but nevertheless, there was a time in which I was teaching in pastoral ministries on these issues and ethics, and you were teaching evangelism. And it used to be that you would never find a Bible school, a Bible college, a seminary that did not have a full course in evangelism. That seems to be changing. Tell us more.
Yes, sadly. I think Dr. Rowry hit it right bullseye when he said, you always got to ask, if you were the devil, how would you do it? Well, Kerby, I have never seen a day unbelievers are more approachable. I'm having the blast of my life because the cancer is huge.
Yes.
Because the economy, because of terrorism, and because of the weirdness of stuff happening today, of stuff. Unsaved are so approachable, everything. But in a day that's great for evangelism, I think Satan's working overtime in our churches, our schools, and our seminaries, and there are so many, and they are actually dropping their course in evangelism. You can go there for 4 years now and now have one course dedicated to evangelism.
I can't even imagine that you would go to a seminary and not have a course in Bible or Bible exposition or Old Testament survey, New Testament survey, systematic theology. But it is amazing to me that you can go to a seminary and never have a class on evangelism.
Well, and what concerns me is two things. Obviously, what does a seminary do?
Yes.
Trains disciples of Christ. What's the first thing he taught disciples? Follow me, I'll make you fishers of men. So if you're going to train disciples, you need to start where he started. The other thing is, on a very practical level, I can tell you everything I want to about Christian living, about the three people of the Trinity, end-time events. But until I tell you Christ died for your sins and rose, I've not impacted your eternal destiny.
Yes.
I mean, that's the message. That is the only message. It is the power of God into salvation.
Well, and again, one of the articles we've posted, I only picked out one or two of yours, but one was on how evangelism fits with discipleship, because sometimes people see those as different. Oh, I'm just discipling believers. Well, if you're not teaching them how to do evangelism, you're not doing discipleship, right? Isn't that called the Great Commission? Or maybe I'm missing something
Evangelism leads to discipleship. Discipleship leads to evangelism.
Yeah.
Because you start where he started. You teach them evangelism. And the easiest ones to teach, Kerby, are as a new convert.
Yeah.
Because, first of all, they have the contacts. They were saved out of, their non-Christian friends. And secondly, they've got a burden. Yeah. And the easiest people to train in evangelism are new converts.
Very true.
But that's why we need to be training our students in seminaries and schools, etc. The priority has to be evangelism. I could almost chart this on a graph, Kerby. If you have a professor who doesn't talk about evangelism, what does he produce? A student who does not talk about evangelism.
Yes.
What does he become? A pastor who does not talk about evangelism. What does he produce? People who do not talk about evangelism.
Yeah.
I mean, you could chart it on a graph, and that's exactly what's happening in our country. It all stems back to our schools, our colleges, and our seminaries.
Well, again, we are, talking about some negative things. I understand that. But these are, as the scriptures would say, the wounds of a friend, because I think it's time to certainly turn some of this around. So we're going to take a break, and we're going to talk about maybe some of the reasons why no longer do we have such an emphasis on evangelism. We have some surveys that give us some indication. We have some comments and anecdotal stories. And a little bit later, let me just mention that one of the things that we want to make available to you through EvanTell is their toolbox. I'll say more about that, but you can even go to evantell.org during the break. Go to the resource section. You can read about it, but we're going to talk about that, and there's some great benefits to signing up with that today. But first of all, we'll come back and talk about why is it we're not talking about evangelism? I thought that was part of the Great Commission. We'll get back to that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Venezuela is in a total economic and humanitarian disaster. Inflation is rampant. The inflation rate has already exceeded 2 million%. All supplies, including toilet paper, are in short supply. Medicine is unavailable in most of the country, and food shortages, along with a crumbling economy, have forced people to change their eating habits. All are losing weight and battling malnutrition in what has come to be known as the Maduro diet. President Nicolas Maduro is one of the reasons for the economic devastation, along with the previous policies of Hugo Chavez. If you needed an object lesson on why socialism is bad for a country and its people, you need look no further than Venezuela. The economic resources are there. The husband of one of my colleagues used to travel to Venezuela with the major oil companies, which brought prosperity to many in the country. But the Chavez government started taking majority stake in various oil projects, and oil companies from the U.S. and Europe left the country. Oil prices dropped, and today we have a crisis so bad that people are eating out of garbage cans and catching and eating zoo animals, dogs, cats, and birds. Trying to get humanitarian aid to the people is difficult. Maduro has blocked aid from crossing the border, arguing that it could be a potential Trojan horse that would lead to military intervention. Earlier this year, the leader of the legislature, Juan Guaido, declared himself to be the acting president and has been backed by the Trump administration. Vice President Mike Pence declared to the people of Venezuela, "We are with you, we stand with you, and will stay with you until democracy is restored." He's also called for leaders in other countries to join the U.S. He said there can be no bystanders in Venezuela's struggle for freedom. We need to pray for our leaders and pray for the people in Venezuela who are suffering through this crisis. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Thinking Man Films, Patterns of Evidence, The Moses Controversy. Did Moses write the first books of the Bible? Patterns of Evidence in theaters March 14th, 16th, and 19th only.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Larry Moyer in studio, and he's with EvanTell. You can go to evantell.org to find some of the material we're going to be talking about today. We also have a link to his own website, Larry Moyer, so you can find both of those on the website, as well as a book that you've talked about with Haddon Robinson, so that will be kind of fun as well. Let me just, first of all, open up the phones. I suspect some of you already have some comments. Maybe you have already have noticed that evangelism is becoming de-emphasized in your church, maybe in the seminary that is producing some of the pastors, maybe in the Bible school that your children have gone to. So I'd love to hear your comments, 1-800-351-1212. We'll get to some of those calls a little bit later. But Larry, let's, if we can, do a little diagnosis. Why is it that we're not talking about evangelism? And I think one reason, and I've got a couple, but one reason I think is that we've de-emphasized sin. We don't think of sin as that important. Now, my church asked me recently to write a devotional for Easter. They have a couple of people writing it, and I got the one on the wrath of God. You can see which one I got. But the point I'm making is that if you go back and look at, the key passage was in Romans 5, verses 9, but, the wrath of God, or in Romans 3:23, or a variety of other passages, is something we should take seriously, but we're starting to sort of have this idea that God is our buddy, God is our friend, God does not take sin seriously. And I think that's one of the reasons why evangelism is waning, because we want to try to be seeker-sensitive and sympathetic and accepted by our society. And I think we've really de-emphasized a fundamental doctrine of the Scriptures.
Yes, I think so, too. Spurgeon was known for his comment, before you can get people saved, you have to get them lost.
Right.
And until I see myself as a sinner, I don't see my need for salvation. It's interesting, Kerby, when the Soviet Union first broke open, When I was there, I had to convince people they could be saved because they thought after 70 years of communism, there was no hope for them. In America, I have to convince people they need to be saved.
They need to be saved.
It's a totally different thing. And I think that's part of the reason. I also think, going back to something you alluded to earlier, we are doing one of the best jobs we've ever done, Kerby, of feeding the poor, helping the hungry.
Right.
The problem is we're calling that evangelism.
That's right.
That's not evangelism. That's pre-evangelism. Important now, but it's pre-evangelism. I've not evangelized you until I tell you Christ died for your sins and rose. Will you trust Christ?
Sure.
And we substituted pre-evangelism for evangelism.
Well, and again, I will understand that certainly missions have done a lot of good. You know, you sometimes have to feed hungry stomachs before you can feed hungry hearts. Got that. But when all of a sudden that displaces the gospel, that's really key. And again, we've got some calls coming in, so we'll get to those in just a minute. 1-800-351-1212. But one issue is I think we don't have a biblical view of sin. There's a second one, Larry, that I'm running into all the time, and that is there's just this sort of belief that maybe people could be saved apart from the gospel. You know, it's the old question that we've all heard before. What about those who have not heard? You know, what about those who cannot believe? And I over the years, when I would especially speak on college campuses, I'd have some of these guys that would be so concerned about the pagans in Africa. I think if I were to be on a campus now, I'd say, well, first of all, there are probably more Christians in Africa than there are in America. So there are Christians in Africa. Wonder about the pagans in America. But more importantly, I think that's just an excuse to keep you from really looking at the gospel. But there is, again, in this sort of seeker-sensitive mindset, this idea that maybe people could be saved apart from the gospel.
Yes, there is that. And now, again, I think part of that's satanic. That if you were Satan, where would you attack? The message.
Yes.
And that I think that's part of it. The gospel is defined in 1 Corinthians 15, 3-5. Christ died for sins and rose from the dead.
Right.
I've been telling people for 46 years that the Bible is 66 books, but the gospel is 10 words. Christ died for sins and rose from the dead. And that's the message.
That is. And again, when people say that, well, maybe there are other ways people can be saved, isn't that the question Jesus asked of the God the Father in the Garden of Gethsemane? You know, if there's any other way?
Yes.
Yeah. And again, there is just a lot of reasons why individuals de-emphasize evangelism. But of course, the last one, which you and I have talked about before, is just a sense of fear, which I think is unwarranted because, like you said, the fields are white for harvest, don't you think? I mean, there seems to be more of an openness to the gospel than I've ever seen before, because as this kind of secular humanistic mindset is played out and left us with this, where the suicide rate is going through the roof, where people are dying of drug overdoses and the opioid epidemic and all of this, I think people are now open more to the gospel than they were just even a few decades ago.
I call it approachability, Kerby.
Yeah.
They're very approachable because cancer is huge. Cancer is huge. They're afraid the doctor's going to say you've got cancer, but they're very approachable. And for that reason, now is the time we ought to be reaching out to non-Christians in the greatest evangelistic thrust that we've had for years.
Okay, so a lot of people, and now I want to get to some phone calls in just a minute, but before we do, you've made a very nice offer. If people go to evantell.org, and I think we have a link there, go to resources, and you scroll down, you'll see something called Toolbox. Now, Toolbox is something that you can download the current issue, but if people sign up to get your Toolbox, they're not only going to get your newsletter, but they're going to get a free book. Is that true?
Yes, we are going to send them, anyone who signs up for the Toolbox today, we will send them one of our free books on evangelism as a complimentary gift, encouragement to them. We will send them one of our free books on evangelism.
And well, again, so if you find yourself saying, okay, I'd like to get some training on evangelism, well, you've come to the right place, because you have booklets, you have tracks, you have videos, you have all sorts of great resources. And so if nothing else, this is something.
DVDs, online training.
Yes. Well, you've made the phone rings. Do you mind taking some phone calls?
Not at all.
Okay, so we'll see if we can make our way through those. And we'll go first to a pastor in Georgia on the Good News Network. Steve, I'd love to hear your comments today as we are talking about the subject of evangelism.
You guys are right on. And when he just mentioned 1 Corinthians 15, 1-5, that is the definition of the gospel. But what I'm finding in the church today is there's a lot of false gospel.
Yeah.
I'll give you one example. In California, there is a growing movement supposedly in the church for flat earth. And they're using it as an excuse for evangelism. And as I explained to my friend, the issue of sin needs to be discussed. And then I'm curious your comment on the term full gospel. When the United Pentecostal Church says, and we're talking United Pentecostal Church, not other Pentecostal groups, but when they say that you must receive the baptism of the Holy Spirit with the evidence of speaking in tongues in order to be saved, and they call that full gospel, I have a problem with that. And I'm curious to hear your comment.
Okay, Larry, first of all, you are getting a false gospel, and I think it's all the more reason. One of the key words I use here so often is this need for discernment, right? To really understand what the gospel is and what the gospel is not. So I'd love to get your thoughts.
Because Satan will try to confuse, and it doesn't matter how you feel about the speaking in tongues and the gifts of the Spirit. That has nothing to do with the gospel. The gospel concerns the death and resurrection of Christ, and there's no full gospel, empty gospel. There's the gospel, and the gospel is Christ died for sins and rose from the dead.
Yeah.
And all that, as far as Christian living things, gifts of the Spirit, however people feel about those, that has nothing to do with the gospel. And one thing happening in our day is we're confusing entering the Christian life but living it.
Yes.
That's one thing happening in our day. First you enter it, then you live it. But don't confuse the two. You're saved by grace and you're assured by grace, I love John. He that believes in me has everlasting life. How to get any simpler than that, Kerby?
Yeah. Well, and even yesterday I was preaching through Philippians 2, and you have this one part about working out your salvation. Well, a lot of people have said, well, that means you work to achieve your salvation. No, it means that you receive the gift of salvation, Ephesians 2, 8, and 9, which is the free gift, not of works, lest anyone boast, but then you work it out. And so the other part of the gospel, if I can use two big theological words, is they confuse justification with sanctification. They confuse your salvation, which is a free gift, which right now anybody listening to this program could receive even now, this free gift of salvation, which is different from then, of course, actually working out your salvation, and that is living the Christian life, right?
Right, that's different. Salvation is completely free. As you said, all you have to do is trust in Christ alone. I tell people Christ did not make the down payment. He made the full payment.
Yeah.
You have to trust in Christ, period. Not in Christ plus your good life or your baptism or your church attendance, but in Christ alone as your only way to heaven.
Well, again, we're going to take a break, and I'll get some more phone calls here in just a minute. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. As we're going to a break, though, let me just mention that we have a link to evantell.org. It's EVANTELL, very simple. It's been around since 1973. And it's going to be around a lot longer. And again, there's some number of resources. There's a store for all the material. There's the Crosstalk app, which we haven't even talked about yet, the Evangelism Study Bible, and then, of course, Toolbox. And if you sign up to get the Toolbox, you're very generous. If people sign up, they'll get a free book. And so that is a great resource. And we'll talk about some of those resources by Dr. Larry Moyer. And if you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. We have a lot more to cover, but we need to take a break. And if you have some comments about evangelism, the Great Commission, I'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Question: do you have a health insurance plan you are not happy with? Well, Bethany and Jason thought they were stuck. Their plan just kept getting more expensive, and Bethany's favorite doctor didn't even take that plan anymore. And then some friends at church told them about MediShare.
With our previous insurance, we were paying $1,200 a month. With MediShare, we now pay around $600 a month.
Yes, they're paying $600 less per month, and that's a pretty typical savings with MediShare, and they actually like MediShare more.
I was able to go back to my original doctor that I absolutely loved, and it's just been an absolutely beautiful thing being a part of MediShare.
Yeah, so they pay a lot less, and they like it more. No wonder MediShare is growing so fast. Find out more. They're super easy to talk to. All you have to do is call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll get to some of those phone calls in just a minute. We have links to evantell.org as well as a link to larrymoyer.com. So you've got some of those resources. But for just a minute, before I take the next phone call, let's talk about what's in your store. And, of course, we're getting close to Easter, so there are some collections of material for Easter evangelism training. One of the things you and I were talking about off the air, pregnancy center resources. I know that you and June Hunt and very few others have really helped emphasize that. And I've just been so impressed with these pregnancy resource centers because not only do they save babies, but they save souls. And there's been a real emphasis, at least in the past, on evangelism at these pregnancy centers, hasn't there?
Yes, our program's called Save the Mother, Save Her Child.
Mm-hmm.
The best way to save a baby is that Jesus saved the mother. And so, therefore, a great opportunity to present them the gospel. They get online training for their pregnancy centers. But we have all kinds of books and DVDs and online training. Obviously, in 45 years, we've built up a lot. One of our most popular books is 21 Things God Never Said,
Yes.
Correct Your Misconception of Evangelism.
Mm-hmm.
31 Days with the Master Fisherman is very popular.
Mm-hmm.
And we have our Evangelism Study Bible was the end of a 6-year project. And people have said to me, if all I had was Evangelism Study Bible, why, that's all we need evangelism.
Yes.
But they can get that from our website. Just go to evantell.org. And as you mentioned, Kerby, if they sign up for our toolbox, our newsletter, they'll get one of our free books on evangelism.
So again, lots of times when you land at a website, you're wondering, how do I get navigate it? Go to the resource sections, and then you'll see that there is a section for store, and we just talked about some of those resources. Then there's a section for toolbox, and if you sign up for the toolbox, you get a free book, so that's pretty nice. Of course, there's a section on the Evangelism Study Bible, which I highly recommend as well. And then let's talk about Crosstalk app for just a minute before we take some of these phone calls, because that's an app that you have available as well.
Yes, for presenting the gospel to children. When I say that, people say to me, Larry, I know you say it's for children, but adults love it.
Yes.
And the fact is, a crosstalk is one of our greatest presentations of the gospel. It's something that you can go through with a child, and it's animated, that kind of thing. And but adults love it as well as children.
Yes. Okay, well, let's go back to the phones. You ready for some more calls? We'll do our best to try to mix in some of the content with calls. So let's take a call. We'll go to Illinois this time. Bob, what is your question for us?
Yes, I reach out to Mormons, and I feel like there's a ping pong match going on and witnessing to them. How is it better? What could I be doing wrong, and how can I better my approach?
Whenever you're talking to anti-cultists of any kind, keep your conversation on two things. Who is Christ? Is heaven free? Because that's where it costs air, all costs air. Who is Christ, and is heaven free?
Mm-hmm.
And I always encourage them, ask them to talk over an open Bible, because the Bible's got to be our authority. And also, one caution I would give is ask them for equal time. Some cults would love to monopolize the time.
Yeah.
Love to take 15 minutes, give you 5. And they have to agree to equal time. Now, if you handle that with grace and truth, sometimes you get somewhere with them, because most people in a cult are not there because of what the cult believes. They're there because someone gave them a sense of belonging, as even Time Magazine one time said.
Yes. So again, major on the majors. What happens, and we can talk about different groups, which will take you off on how Jesus was crucified, or the whole issue of 6-day creation, or whatever. And I just say, let's bring it back to who was Jesus. What did Jesus do? And as you said, is heaven free? Because most of them have a works-oriented salvation. Of course, that takes you to Ephesians 2:8-9.
Because they like to eat off on bunny trails.
Yes.
Yes.
And you just got to cut those bunny trails off, because, you can spend an hour, and I've done this, even talking with Jehovah's Witnesses, things like that, talking about things that just aren't really going to be very helpful. So that's where I think you would focus on it. Again, there are some great resources. We've even had some of those on our website at Point of View. Also, a group I work with, Probe Ministries, you go to probe.org, you can find some great material there on maybe occasionally want to challenge one of their views or one of their assertions. But I just like to say, keep the major point to be your major point. And that's really what it gets to.
Amen. It's easy to forget. Thank you.
Well, appreciate your phone call. And again, we might even get into that in a more specific area later. But I think it's just a good illustration of whatever it is, whether you're talking to a non-Christian or somebody involved in some kind of a contemporary Christian organization that's what we call a cult or a religious movement, there's always this distraction factor. And it just seems to me that the smart person who's doing evangelism will focus on the major point, and that is your biblical Christology. Who is Jesus Christ? And number two, salvation, and if you usually they stray on one of those issues, and then you take them back to the scriptures, and if scripture is your authority, it's pretty much a done deal, isn't it?
Yes, and if someone, Kerby, if I'm talking to someone, they bring up something that's kind of a bunny trail, as alluded to earlier, I say, could we write that down here?
Good
and when
point.
we're done, we'll come back and answer it. It's interesting how many times when you come back to this, we're not important anymore.
Yeah. Again, I remember one time somebody said to R.C. Sproul, I think there are all these errors in the Bible. And he said, okay, well, then tell me what they are. And so they kind of wrote a few down. This person had a longer list than I would have even thought individual might come up with. And at the end, he said, now, can I go through here and just take the time to try to give you a brief answer for each one of those? And at the end, he said, now, would you agree that I've given you an answer for every one of your objections or one of the so-called errors in the Bible? And he said, yes. So now, aren't you ready to accept Christ? He said, well, no, R.C., there's still errors in the Bible. See, sometimes they're just excuses. And so when a person has a legitimate concern, I think we give them an answer. But many times they're nothing more than excuses, aren't they?
Yes, many times.
Well, let's take another phone call here. We'll go to Arizona this time, KNLB. Wayne, what's your comment for us today?
Yes. Maybe it's just that too many people are wrapped up in their own lives to consider evangelizing others. That's a possibility. I mean, if you're wrapped up in your own life so much, then it's kind of hard to think of anyone else.
Yes, we encourage people to sign up in EvanTell.org for the toolbox, and they'll get a free book on evangelism. And the last issue of the toolbox discussed busyness, because one of the big hindrances of evangelism today is busyness.
Yes.
And so you're right on.
Yeah. And Wayne, have you heard this before of individuals that aren't really interested in evangelism?
I haven't really heard it. I have seen it.
Yeah.
I've seen it. I've even seen it in my own life in the past.
Yeah, well, and that's the point. One of the questions that maybe I want to put on the table before we take our next break is a lot of people don't know how to start a conversation. You know as well as I do. Somebody says, hey, did you just watch the NBA last night? Or did you see we're pretty soon going to play baseball, or boy, this weather. And you are really a master and have taught us in some of the great tools there at EvanTell on how to turn the conversation to spiritual things. And that's one of the difficulties I think some people have. Can you give us some help there?
Yes, Kerby. It's not always easy, but I can tell you it's not 1/10 as hard as people make it, because you go from the secular to the spiritual to the gospel. You start with the secular, family, job, background. Talk about the three areas. All people have family, all have job, looking for one, all have a background.
Yeah.
Go from secular, family, job, background, something spiritual. Prayer, I'll say a word of prayer for you. God, church, religion, whatever. And you go from there to the gospel. Christ died for sins and arose. We encourage a principle called plow and pursue. Plow in the conversation, enjoy it immensely, and pursue any way possible. That there's no one way. There's as many ways there are people whom you talk to. And you go from secular, family, job, background, to spiritual, religion, church, prayer, whatever, to the gospel.
Yeah. And again, I think it's, as I've heard some of the training that you've done, and when we come back from the break, I want to spend some time talking about some of that, because we do have a way in which you can schedule you or other speakers to come and speak, or to show some of the videos and do the training. Because as you point out, if the pastor's not talking about evangelism, then the congregation isn't. I've noticed that if it's misty in the pulpit, it's foggy in the pews. So if we don't have a clear understanding of the gospel in the pulpit, or we aren't explaining how to do evangelism, nobody's going to be doing it. So I want to come back from the break maybe and talk about some of the resources you have there. But let me also, just as we're going to a break, mention that as you go to the website, you're also going to see a book that you have put together. It's called A Mentor Wisdom, and it's, again, about Haddon Robinson, and certainly an individual that we've all learned a great deal from, so I thought I'd mention your book is available as well, and that's on the website. So just some great things to talk about. And if you'd like to join the conversation, we'll give a few more of you if you'd like to jump in real quickly with a comment, agree or disagree. Maybe you've noticed something that has been effective in your evangelistic outreach, or maybe your church has been really involved in evangelism. Maybe some of you have even had the EvanTell training. We'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. We have a link to evantell.org. I mentioned again, when you go to the store there, we're coming up to Easter, so there's some Easter material. There's some great evangelism training material. There's some great tracts, of course, the Pregnancy Resource Centers, if you have a pregnancy center, and, of course, such books as 21 Things God Never Said and 31 Days to Living as a New Believer. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Hoosier State has taken steps to codify important religious liberty protections for Indiana's students. In April 2017, the Indiana General Assembly passed and its governor quickly signed a measure providing students with the chance to take an elective surveying the world's religions while outlining the civil liberties afforded to its students in Indiana's public schools. The new law provides each local school district the freedom to offer an elective course that will study the historical, cultural, and literary contributions of the world's major religions. At the same time, some of the critical civil liberties protected by the law include protecting the student's right to express their religious beliefs in class and class assignments, the right to pray before, during, and after the school day, and the right to access a school's facilities in the same manner that secular groups do. Of course, many of these protections are found in policies issued by the United States Department of Education. Nonetheless, it is encouraging to see a state dedicate significant legislative effort to religious liberty. Students should not be required to hide their faith at school, nor should they be punished for daring to discuss their religious beliefs while at school. Religious liberty should be our national priority. It's good to see that, at least for one state, it's a clear priority for their students. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Guide at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and we have Larry Moyer in studio with us. Some of you might say, I would like to meet him face-to-face. I'd like to come to a luncheon and find out a little bit more. I'd like to come to a dinner. I would like to have him come to our church. So, first of all, of course, you've got an event coming up here at the end of April. But then we also want to move from there to maybe we could bring him come speak in our church. But talk about what's happening April 30th.
Yeah, April 30th, we're going to have our annual luncheon from 11:30 to 1:15. Sheila Walsh is going to be our speaker,
Wow.
one of the women of faith people.
Yes.
And yet, exciting testimony. It'll be the Western Galilee area here in Dallas. And we'd love to have them come. They can simply go to EvanTell.org/luncheon, sign up that way. Or if they have a pen in their hand, they can call 214-420-6327. 214-420-6327, or go to our website, EvanTell.org/luncheon 2019. But they are free to come, and the whole thing's underwritten, so it's no cost, and we'd love to have them, but they do have to sign up for it.
And I might just mention, too, that if you're driving right now, I don't want you to drive off the road. Just go to pointofview.net. We have an actual button that will take them to the luncheon as well. But some people might say, I'm listening in Alaska. I'm listening in Pennsylvania, your old home state, or I'm listening in New Hampshire or Georgia or Illinois or wherever. Of course, we've gotten calls today from some of those places, including Arizona. They say, I would really like to do some training. Our church is not doing all that it could to train everybody in evangelism. So if you go to the website, evantell.org/training, you will see that there is online training, there's live training, there are training resources and featured speakers. Talk about how, if you are convinced, as we are, that we in the body of Christ have really de-emphasized evangelism, what resources would be available for training in our local churches?
Well, we have training online. We have also DVD training. We have 3-month training, different strokes for different folks, Kerby.
Yeah.
And we have 2-hour, 4-hour, 10-hour, whatever training. It's all available through our evantell.org. All kinds of books they can do in Sunday school. They can do as a congregation, go through them at the same time, that kind of thing. And the Lord, as long as the Lord, you alluded to something earlier, Kerby, as long as the Lord blesses me with health and strength, which he has today, I travel full time.
Mm-hmm.
I have no desire to cut back, no desire to retire. God's really burdened me to go to churches of any size with no set fee to evangelize or train others.
Right.
And so I speak at a lot of what's called wild game feast, which is the easiest thing in our day to get an unbeliever to, the easiest thing. And I speak a lot of those to train people in evangelism while I'm there. And so they ought to feel free to write. They can either go to our website or go to L. Moyer at evantell.org is my, they can find that out through the website too. L. Moyer is LB. They can email me L. Moyer, MOYER, evantell.org is on your website too.
Yeah.
And so, but I'd be happy to be of service to them. Some people have said I didn't realize you were still available, and I'm still available. I'd love to help in any way I could.
Well, again, let me talk about that wild game feast for another couple of minutes, because you got, first of all, you've got all sorts of opportunities to reach out to men, and we've had, Jim Cody in here talking about this outreach, and of course we're going to be doing some programs soon as we get to Father's Day and the rest. But there is something about this that you probably have people not only in your church but in your community that get hunting magazines. They think Safari Club is the best thing in the whole world. And you have said, I don't know how I can reach them because they're pretty tough. They're out there in their camo, and they're really not necessarily the kind of person to walk into church. But when Larry Moyer shows up and says, we're going to have a wild game feast, and I'm going to share my testimony from hunting, they just come out of the woodwork. And I think it's just another great evangelistic opportunity.
We average 50% unbelievers, and Kerby, they're from men and women. 20% of those come are women.
Yeah.
And only 1/3 are hunters. The rest are just outdoors people. They just love the outdoors. And the easiest thing to get people there, we average 50 to 100 door prizes. We have a complete manual that tells them how to get ready for it, and we thoroughly help them prepare for it. And it's exciting. I'm about to leave for one in Virginia, and they're estimating 500 in attendance. It's absolutely exciting. And in a day that people are approachable.
Well, and again, back to the point, they don't all have to be hunters. I mean, I shoot a bow and arrow, and I shoot a shotgun, I shoot a gun, but I've never killed anything. But probably just because I'm a bad shot. No, mostly because I'm shooting at targets or, clay or whatever. But this is just another great evangelistic opportunity that we're missing. And at a time, as you said, when people are so approachable for the body of Jesus Christ and for churches and for seminaries and Bible schools, even sometimes mission organizations to de-emphasize evangelism, I just think that's criminal. And it's something that needs to change. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on the program today.
Well, I appreciate that. I deeply appreciate that. And I tell people, if you really want to change a church, change a seminary, Do it with grace and truth. Sit down and talk with them, but make sure you're doing it yourself, because you don't want to ask people to do something you're not doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so be evangelistic in your own lifestyle, reaching out to neighbors, friends, relatives. Let us help you through our website. Again, if they sign up for a toolbox, we'll send them one of our free books on evangelism. But let us help you overcome fear, not knowing how. And then sit down in grace and truth, talk to schools and seminaries and churches and say, look, we've got to get back to evangelism. The Son of Man has come to seek and save the lost.
Yeah.
Luke 19:10. That's what we ought to be about.
So again, if people want to know a little bit more about scheduling a speaker or about getting some of the resources, you can go to EvanTell. And you did mention that in passing, that you will go and not necessarily charge a fee, because I know some of our listeners have small churches and things, but, be generous with Larry. And one more time, just before we run out of time, if people sign up and get their toolbox, which again is your newsletter, you'll send a book, right?
Yes, we send one of our free books on evangelism, one of our most popular books on evangelism, we send them, and to help them in evangelism.
Well, one of the other things that I've encouraged you to do is to get the Crosstalk app. We haven't talked much about that, but you can kind of click on that. But it's an interactive gospel presentation with animation, which is pretty amazing. So, like you said, it's for the kids, but the adults kind of love it too. And then if you really wanted to just have a Bible that would help you understand evangelism, the Evangelism Study Bible is one of the tools. And a lot of people have said, if I had that, that's really all I need, because you've got just an incredible number of endorsements from people that have been on this program, like Tony Evans, a person that you just wrote about recently, Haddon Robinson. Of course, Mark Bailey's been on the program, and many others that all endorse that Evangelism Study Bible. So it's just another great resource. So it is just a light. You and I have been good friends for a long time. Pro Ministry started in 1973. EvanTell started in 1973, so we've always had that in common. And it's just been great to have you here. So say hi to your wife, Tammy, and look forward to the next opportunity.
Thank you, Kerby. Always enjoy being on the program with you.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back tomorrow, we have a lot more to cover. So let me just mention that if you find yourself saying, okay, that came pretty fast, there's an app, there's a book, there's some booklets, there's all that, just simply go to our website, pointofview.net. That's all you need to know. And so everything we talked about in the first hour with Wycliffe, all the conversation we've had with Larry Moyer in the second hour, all available at our website, pointofview.net. And I hope you'll take the time to find some of the other resources that we have posted there today. My Viewpoints commentary is on what is happening in Venezuela. That is a crisis, which again is a humanitarian disaster, an economic disaster. And as I've said before, if you want to understand why socialism isn't a good idea, you need only look at Venezuela. You can get a pretty good sense of that. So we've got that material up there. We have some articles that you would certainly want to read today, including when we were talking about this idea of transparency in healthcare. And don't forget, we also have a banner there that says, Go to Israel with Kerby. We have a trip to Israel, which will take place in October. We'd love to have you join us as we go to Israel and to Rome. You can go to Israel or Israel and Rome, and that's available on our website as well. All of it available at the website, pointofview.net. Want to thank Andrew and Stephanie for their help behind the scenes. Hope you've enjoyed the conversation. I look forward to joining with you tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Question: do you have a health insurance plan you are not happy with? Well, Bethany and Jason thought they were stuck. Their plan just kept getting more expensive, and Bethany's favorite doctor didn't even take that plan anymore. And then some friends at church told them about MediShare.
With our previous insurance, we were paying $1,200 a month. With MediShare, we now pay around $600 a month.
Yes, they're paying $600 less per month, and that's a pretty typical savings with MediShare. And they actually like MediShare more.
I was able to go back to my original doctor that I absolutely loved, and it's just been an absolutely beautiful thing being a part of MediShare.
Yeah, so they pay a lot less, and they like it more. No wonder MediShare is growing so fast. Find out more. They're super easy to talk to. All you have to do is call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.